My name is Alexa. I am 33 years old, and for several years now I have been working remotely, which gives me a certain freedom, but at the same time deprives me of the very dynamics that can be found in the lives of people who leave home every day for work, rush to the bus or the subway, meet strangers, and start conversations in line for coffee. Now I live in my parents' house, which fills my mornings with the smells of freshly baked bread and quiet conversations at the kitchen table, where each day begins with an almost sacred ritual, a cup of strong coffee and a leisurely exchange of news. My weekdays flow in the rhythm of familiar duties, which I perform with a light, even domestic rigor: cooking, cleaning, small chores around the house and, of course, working at the computer, most often in silence, under the clicking of keys and the sound of rain outside the window. My family is my parents, with whom I became close again when I returned home, and my brother, who recently, last year, married a woman named Romina. I always thought that their union was an almost ideal picture of a happy marriage. They looked so natural together, as if fate itself had brought them together, and I was sincerely happy for them, watching from the sidelines, without feeling any envy or doubt in their harmony. But lately I have noticed more and more often that Romina has started visiting our house. At first, I explained it to myself simply: she misses us, she enjoys being near her husband's relatives, maybe she just needs a little change of scenery. This house, as I later found out, belonged to her relatives, and at first I was even worried whether she would be embarrassed to return here as a guest. But my fears turned out to be in vain. She held herself calmly, confidently, even a little playfully, and nothing in her behavior betrayed internal discomfort. Unlike her, I felt a little confused: her bright, but not provocative beauty, the way she speaks, as if she always knows what she wants. All this involuntarily confused me. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy! Sometimes I catch myself feeling almost like a younger sister next to her, not by age, but by some inner feeling. She knows how to create a cozy space where it is easy to talk and be yourself. Once, when we were sitting in the living room, she suddenly, with that same light curiosity characteristic only of very close people, asked, "Alexa, why don't you have a boyfriend yet? Don't you ever feel awkward in the company of men?" The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. I told her that my job does not involve meeting new people, that I almost never go to social events, and that, in principle, it is difficult for me to make acquaintances outside the virtual space. She listened very attentively, her head slightly bowed, as if trying to understand every word, and there was something in her eyes that inspired trust. "You know," she said after a pause, "I can help you a little. You are a beautiful woman, Alexa. You just need a little confidence and the right delivery." And from that moment on, a series of small but touching acts of care began that she showed me, as if she really were my sister. She shared makeup tips, picked out colors that would best highlight my skin, explained how to correctly distribute accents in clothes. "You have to be ready at any moment. You never know where you will meet the one," she said with a sincere sparkle in her voice. I really felt her support, and it warmed my heart. I began to think about myself in a new way, not as a remote worker in home clothes, but as a woman who has the right to be beautiful, to be noticed, to be loved. Yes, I often wear a bandana, just so that my hair does not get in the way during work, and it seemed like a small thing to me. But now I thought about such little things completely differently. I rarely use cosmetics, relying more on good skin care and moisturizing, and I prefer comfortable, soft clothes in which I can sit all day at my laptop without being distracted by tight jeans or shoes. But when Romina comes into the house and sees me in these simple home pants and a stretched sweater, she probably can't imagine how I could look in a different image. After all, at my brother's wedding and other family celebrations, I always carefully selected my image, thinking through every element, from my hairstyle to the last detail of my makeup. It's just that she didn't seem to remember it, or didn't attach any importance to it. One day, shining with some especially perky energy, she suddenly said, "Alexa, let's sort through your wardrobe. I'm very interested in what you have in there." And before I could object, she had already walked into my room and opened the closet doors, as if it were her own space. I stood there a little confused, wondering whether I should interfere, but there was nothing intrusive in her gestures, only good intentions, which I eventually accepted. "I don't have many clothes, but I chose each item with love, so that it matches my style and is truly to my liking. My favorite brands are neatly hung, the colors match, and the order in the closet reflects my desire for inner harmony. Romina moved the hangers apart, ran her hand over the fabrics and suddenly said with genuine surprise, "Wow, I didn't expect that. You have such beautiful clothes, Alexa. And your cosmetics are simply first class." She noticed, obviously impressed, how tastefully and carefully I kept my things, and suddenly admitted that she always thought that the brands I preferred were too expensive for her, and although there was no envy in her voice, only genuine surprise, I suddenly felt a slight tension reign between us for a moment, barely perceptible, but still noticeable, as if our ideas about everyday aesthetics, about the things that surround us, and even about ourselves, suddenly diverged slightly. While Romina continued her impromptu research, sorting through hangers and taking cosmetic bags out of drawers, she commented on each blouse, each sweater, each bottle, as if trying to recreate my image in her own way, to understand how I look at the world and how I want the world to look at me. Almost an hour had passed, and I was already beginning to feel how her endless stream of comments and unexpected insights were slightly wearing on my patience, and, sensing that her enthusiasm, however well-meaning, had become a little excessive, I gently intervened, choosing a tone that was not judgmental, just a quiet reminder of reality. "Romina, I think it's about time," I said, trying to smile, but at the same time returning to the present moment, in which I still had my own affairs and my inner balance. "Oh," she exclaimed, as if she had just realized how carried away she had become. "Sorry, I really did go a little overboard with looking through your things." She made a guilty face, but then, without losing her usual liveliness, declared that, in her opinion, I had no need for new purchases at all, and this was her final conclusion, quite encouraging, if not for one but, she pulled out all her winter clothes, leaving them laid out right on my chair and part of the bed, as if wanting to compare, or perhaps find something inspiring for herself. A slight disorder reigned in the room, which made my head spin, because it was not mine, not native, and, as it seemed to me, she was in no particular hurry to clean it up. "No, I choose my own cosmetics carefully," I said a little defensively when she picked up one of my tubes of foundation and looked at it distrustfully. "I have sensitive skin. I tried different brands for a long time, and over time narrowed the circle to these specific products." Romina frowned with slight surprise, as if she had never heard before that self-care could be so individual and thoughtful. "It must be convenient with such high-quality cosmetics," she said thoughtfully. "Although it seems you don't use them often. You rarely go outside, don't you?" I nodded, a little embarrassed, because her words reminded me again of that line between our lifestyles. "Yes, to be honest, almost never. Only if the occasion is special. I only put on cosmetics when I really need to." My words apparently did not please her, because she suddenly frowned and said with emphasis, "This will not do, Alexa. Next time we see each other, I will definitely teach you a few makeup tricks. Seriously. This is important." I chuckled to myself, not knowing whether to laugh or sigh. At that moment, she returned to my closet again, looked through a few more things, and finally, when the evening began to thicken outside the windows, said that it was time for her to go home. I walked her to the door, and, left alone in silence, I again felt a strange uneasiness growing in my soul, as if a light veil that had previously hidden certain things was beginning to dissipate. The thought came to me more and more often: why does Romina come to our house so often? What draws her here, if not just a desire to visit her husband's parents? Maybe things are not so smooth between her and my brother. Maybe their relationship, so perfect on the surface, was actually starting to show cracks. This guess made my heart clench, not because I wished them ill, but because I couldn't find an explanation for her constant presence here. I couldn't figure out what exactly motivated her, and the more I thought about it, the more the feeling of uneasy uncertainty grew within me. Meanwhile, in complete contrast to my wary state, my parents welcomed Romina with open arms, and each of her visits turned into a small holiday for them. They spoke of her with love and warmth, as if she were their own daughter. "Isn't it great that Alexa has an older sister?" Mom remarked cheerfully at dinner. "We can't wait for Romina to give you makeup lessons next time." Dad agreed, adding with a smile, "Just don't rely on her too much, Alexa. You're a smart girl in your own right. I nodded in agreement, torn between gratitude for their involvement and the mixed feelings that arose every time I thought about Romina. In truth, I never asked her to teach me makeup. I have a busy life already, and finding time for romance or long beauty treatments is simply not on my list of priorities. Romina's offer to help me was entirely her initiative, as are most of her spontaneous ideas, which I always seem to get sucked into without any special request from me. My parents, of course, interpret her behavior as care and participation, as support. Sometimes I really wish Romina would take my need for personal space into account more, especially now that my work from home requires maximum concentration, privacy and, albeit quiet, but autonomy, which I need so much. However, it is really difficult for me to directly reject her proposals, because each of them is dictated by sincere, good intentions, and despite my fatigue from her stormy activity and constant invasion of my personal space, I continue to smile, nod, agree and even thank her, because there is no malice in her voice, and not a shadow of aggression in her gestures. When I try to discuss my doubts with my parents, who seem to simply adore Romina, meeting her every time with an open heart and a warm smile, they were only frightened by the weight that my thoughts carried, and their faces became sad, as if I had betrayed some quiet family harmony, sowing mistrust in the one whom they already considered part of the family. I sighed, restrained my resentment and, not wanting to develop the topic, returned to my room, where the still unsorted chaos of winter clothes left by Romina was waiting for me. I started going through my clothes, putting them back into the closet one by one, ironing soft sweaters, cashmere scarves and thick cardigans, mentally calming myself with measured movements, when suddenly a strange, almost panicky anxiety washed over me. My favorite sweater was gone. Wait, where is my favorite sweater? I muttered under my breath, looking around and going over the last few days in my mind. The feeling of irritation slowly but surely penetrated under my skin, because I clearly remembered how recently I held this sweater in my hands, how carefully I hung it in the closet, soft, deep blue, with a collar that fit perfectly on my shoulders. I could not remember throwing it away or giving it to anyone. On the contrary, this thing was one of the few that brought me a feeling of comfort and confidence, especially on cold evenings. Every time I update my wardrobe, I try to do it consciously. I buy only what I really need, and with the same respect I part with what has already served its purpose. Thanks to this, I formed the habit of keeping a kind of mental inventory. I knew what things I had and where exactly they should be. This sweater, I bought it only last winter, was almost new, well cared for, and knew exactly where it belonged on the shelf. The last time someone touched my closet was this morning, when Romina enthusiastically rummaged through it, sorting through things with the same ease with which, as a child, I looked for my favorite doll under the pillows. I remembered how I went into the living room for a minute to ask my parents to make tea and some snacks for us, leaving Romina alone in the room. At the time, it seemed harmless to me, who would have thought that in a few minutes something strange could happen. But I distinctly remember noticing that Romina had brought her bag into my room, not as a guest, but as someone who believed she had the right to do so. It was this detail that suddenly struck me. If anyone could have taken something from my closet without my noticing, it could only have been her. But the idea of directly accusing Romina seemed both premature and, frankly, terribly unpleasant. Without evidence, without understanding the reasons, I felt almost paralyzed, not knowing what to do. Despite my alarming suspicions, I decided not to become a victim again, neither of helplessness, nor of my own fears, and to take preventive measures. A month after this incident, anticipating another visit from Romina, I, with trembling fingers, placed an online order, invested in a small, almost invisible CCTV camera, which I carefully hid among the books and jewelry on the shelf in the room, making sure that it covered the closet, the dressing table, and part of the bed. As if on schedule, Romina reappeared, with a smile, with hugs, with another wave of enthusiasm. "Well, beautiful, today is our first real makeup lesson," she announced, throwing her scarf on the chair from the doorway, and with the same confidence as last time, approached my closet, armed with my brushes, palettes, and sponges, as if it were a stage, and she was an actress rehearsing her entrance. A few minutes later, I was sitting on the carpet like a schoolgirl, with her own makeup spread out in front of me. Even though I wasn't going anywhere that day, I let her apply it, trying to remain calm despite the troubling thoughts swirling in my head. When she finished, I went almost immediately to the bathroom to wash everything off my face, not because I didn't like it, but because I wanted to be alone, to catch my breath. When I returned, Romina was about to leave. "Wait, don't go right away," I said. "I made tea and snacks in the living room. Let's sit for a while." I invited her in with the same polite tone I always used, but tension pulsed inside me. I just wanted to make sure she had really left before I went to the computer and checked the recording. This precaution was a step I had never had to take before, but circumstances, as we know, call for decisiveness. When I was finally alone, I sat down at my laptop, plugged in the camera, and started watching the footage. My heart literally froze when I saw Romina, alone in the room, go to the vanity, quickly look around, and, as if out of habit, put a few cosmetics, including nail polishes that I hardly ever use, into her bag. She did it so confidently and calmly that a chill ran down my spine. It seemed she really thought that no one would notice, that these little things, insignificant, forgotten, would forever remain out of sight. I was shocked. It wasn't that these were jewelry or large sums of money, but the fact itself, this shadow of betrayal, this tiny, almost imperceptible lie, stabbed me painfully in the heart. I silently transferred the recording to my smartphone, saving it as proof, as a memory, as a symbol of the change that had quietly but irreversibly entered my life. Then, still in a state of internal numbness from what I saw on the recording, I headed to the living room, intending to finally discuss what happened with my family, hoping that a sincere conversation would at least clarify the situation a little and relieve the growing feeling of anxiety that did not leave me for a second. By a strange coincidence, my brother, Aiden, was already in the living room, who, upon seeing me, immediately got up from his chair and approached, with an expression on his face that, it seemed to me, was more irritation than concern, although he was clearly trying to give his tone a sympathetic sound. "Ah, Alexa," he began, shrugging slightly, "a lot of time has passed. I heard that Romina gave you a makeup lesson again today. Please stop relying on her. You make her feel obligated to come here." I was taken aback, because I hadn't expected such a comment at all, and, trying to maintain my composure, I answered calmly, but with a clear degree of vulnerability. "I don't remember ever asking Romina for help. She suggested it herself, all of it. The lesson, the visits, these were her initiatives." However, his face immediately darkened with irritation, and his voice sounded confident, which only worsened my already agitated state. "Of course," he said sharply, "you're never to blame for anything. But, you know, she feels obligated because you, Alexa, are in a mess. She's trying her best to help you get out of your, well, how can I put it, swamp." "In a mess?" I asked again, shocked and standing in complete bewilderment. "Do you really think I'm in a mess?" He snorted dismissively, as if my bewilderment only confirmed his point, and then, as if biding his time, added with cold confidence. "I heard from our parents that all you do is play on the computer at home all day. Romina worries about you. She told me she has a closet full of expensive clothes, and you have a ton of good cosmetics. Tell me, where do you get so much money, Alexa? You don't work, do you? Are you stealing from your parents?" I was speechless. The words hit me like a bolt of lightning, swift, stinging, burning. He accused me not only of idleness, but also of stealing, me, the daughter of my parents, a woman who built her independence with honor. I stood in shock, looking at him, trying to realize that he really said that. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, feeling the anger and resentment begin to grow. "I work remotely, I have a stable income, and everything I have is the result of my labor. I have never taken a penny from my parents without their knowledge." But he, not wanting to listen, continued with the same stubborn arrogance. "We can no longer let you manage things. We are taking over the household." His words sounded like a final verdict. He saw me as a decorative element in this house, useless and superfluous. His idea of me was based on superficial observations, a laptop, a bandana, home clothes. For him, this was enough to paint a portrait of a loser. When my parents returned home, I didn't waste a moment. I relayed Aiden's harsh words to them in a measured but direct manner, hoping that their reaction would help clarify the situation and put an end to this absurd mistrust. But instead of an immediate response, they fell silent, looking at each other as if they were considering something far more complex than I could have imagined. Mom mumbled something vague. Dad tensed, as if he was about to say something important but hesitated. "Please," I pressed, "I need clarity. Aiden says he's going to live here. Are you really okay with that?" "Dad?" "Mom?" Dad, after a long pause, quietly replied, "If Aiden wants to live here, well, I don't see any reason to object." Mom looked at me with some strange gentleness and added, almost dreamily, "Yes, Romina is a wonderful person. And maybe we could all have fun living together in this house." I barely kept myself from screaming. They had actually said it. They were ready to welcome Aiden and Romina into the house as full-fledged residents, as if I didn't belong here anymore. Aiden stood behind me, and I heard his voice grow louder, more mocking, triumphant, as if he'd just won a chess game I hadn't even had time to prepare for. "Unlike you, a neat freak who just sits at home, I actually make money and have a wife. No one here wants someone like you." I flushed at the words, a pain shooting through my chest, and I snapped back. "I'm not a neat freak. I work. From home." But he didn't blink, sneering dismissively. "Oh, working from home is something that pathetic people who have fallen out of society do. It's not much different from being a neat freak." His words cut to the quick. It hurt. Not just from a lack of understanding, but from the fact that my own brother, with whom we grew up under the same roof, shared the same holidays, sorrows and joys, now looked at me as a stranger. His non-recognition of my work, my labor, my life, was the last thing I was ready to tolerate. Nowadays, more and more companies, both large and small, officially approve of the remote work format, recognizing its effectiveness and viability, and many people across the country successfully earn their living without leaving the threshold of their own home, creating a productive, stable, and respected professional environment within four walls. I belonged to this category, and although my work did not take place within the walls of a traditional office, this in no way diminished my value either as a specialist or as an adult, independent woman, but the misconceptions, stupid prejudices, and unfounded accusations on the part of my brother, coupled with the general atmosphere of tension that hung in the house after his visit, made everything that was happening almost unbearable. Aiden continued his monologue, calling me a clean freak with disdain, as if my desire to live in order and privacy made me unworthy, devoid of human value. His voice was firm, as if he were a judge in a case whose outcome had already been decided. "Okay, clean freak who works from home, pack your things and leave," he said with icy directness, leaving no room for compromise or a hint of compassion. At that moment, Mom and Dad, sitting on the couch, began to alternately shift their gazes from him to me, and their faces, full of confusion and fatigue, expressed more a desire to avoid conflict than a determination to resolve it. "Well, what can we do?" Mom muttered, and Dad echoed her, shaking his head and seeming to distance himself from what was happening. It was a truly depressing, almost eerie scene. I felt alienated from my own family, as if I no longer belonged. Everyone seemed to be immensely charmed by Romina's friendly, charming nature, and perhaps somewhere behind closed doors they were already discussing how wonderful it would be to free up more space in the house, especially if she and Aiden were planning on having children, grandchildren, something they probably no longer expected from me, a single woman working alone. I couldn't be sure of my parents' true motives, but the atmosphere, their silence, their evasive glances, all of it made it painfully clear that there was no place for me here anymore. Still, I held on, didn't let a single tear fall, didn't let weakness take over. I looked into my brother's eyes and said quietly, collectedly, "I understand. I'm taking the furniture and all the appliances I bought myself with me." These words, as it turned out, caught Aiden and Romina off guard. They looked at each other, confusion flashing in their eyes. "How could such a neat person like you afford furniture and appliances?" Aiden said incredulously, immediately turning to his parents. "Didn't you buy this together?" Mom and Dad looked at each other and with their usual ease, almost with a smile, answered, "Everything we bought after you moved in, Aiden, was paid for by Alexa. If you earn more, as you say yourself, we can buy new furniture if it disappears. We even thought about a new massage chair, remember? It was almost ironic, because when I had offered the chair earlier it had seemed like an unnecessary expense, but now that my things were to be repossessed, anything was suddenly possible. My parents were as optimistic as ever, never allowing a shadow of conflict to linger on their faces, and in that easygoing manner it was clear they had long ago learned to avoid difficult conversations, especially when it came to personal boundaries and finances. I knew Aiden had often tried to talk to them about money, especially in the context of their pension and household, but they had always laughed it off, hiding their shortcomings behind a soft veil of familial good nature. "We're calm because you're here, Aiden," they would tell him, smiling as if it were a genuine compliment rather than an escape from reality. I watched this exchange from the stairs, mobile in hand, finishing the call to finally confirm the arrangements for the move. I wasn't going to put it off any longer. The next day, I was leaving this house. I had contacted friends in advance, including an old acquaintance who had his own small transport company. He agreed to help, and in this off-peak season we easily agreed on a time and a car. When the trucks pulled up to the house the next day, the morning was cool and clear. The movers, polite and focused, quickly began packing boxes, lifting furniture, and putting everything according to the list that I had prepared in advance. The work was methodical, precise, without fuss. And Aiden and Romina, standing in the doorway, silently watched what was happening. Their eyes reflected not just surprise, but a frank incomprehension of how I, a house cleaner, as he called me, could organize the moves so clearly and decisively. I instructed one of the movers to walk through the house and make sure that nothing was left behind. The day turned out to be busy and nervous, but by its end I felt a strange relief. I had to furnish a new apartment, fill it with life and meaning again, and perhaps learn to build my future away from old expectations and unhealed family wounds. Everything I was leaving behind was no longer mine. And everything that lay ahead was starting from scratch. After the last box was carefully placed in the back of the truck, the doors slammed shut with a dull click, and my gaze lingered for a moment on the so familiar silhouette of the house, which was now forever in the past. The car smoothly moved off, taking with it all my things, all my work, a piece of memory and long years spent within these walls. My friend, who had come to help with the move, was riding next to me, and, looking at me with a slight smile, asked, slightly tilting his head, "So, Alexa, are we heading to your new place? Sorry for everything so suddenly, but are you sure this is the right time?" I turned to him and answered softly, feeling the calm in my chest that I had been working towards for so long. "There is no need to apologize. When you said you wanted to help create a new work environment, I knew I could handle it. It's not that hard, as long as there are people around who support you." He nodded in understanding, and we drove in silence, leaving behind my old address, that same starting point. And suddenly, as if taking heart, Romina, who had been sitting silently all this time, clearly shaken by the unfolding events, turned to me with a strained but still holding smile. "So you are really a writer? And this gentleman is your editor?" I nodded, confirming her guess. "Yes, I have been planning to move for a long time," I said reservedly, "to create favorable conditions for creativity. Writing in a house where someone enters your room without asking, takes clothes, cosmetics and personal space, became impossible. I was supposed to leave earlier, but I was delayed, because the property taxes on the house fell entirely on me." I turned to her and looked straight into her eyes. "That's when, Aiden, you decided to return to the house. But now I'm grateful that you stayed to take care of my parents, because all they had left was their pension and their gambling habits. I'm not going to tell anyone where my new place is. And you know why, Romina? Because I can't even imagine that my thief sister-in-law could show up at my door again." I pulled my smartphone out of my pocket and, without flinching, showed the video. On the screen, there she was, Romina, discreetly hiding my makeup in her bag. Horror appeared on her face, paleness eclipsed the blush, and she looked as if she had seen a ghost. Aiden and his parents saw for the first time what they didn't want to notice, and now they couldn't take their eyes off her. "It's not what it seems," Aiden muttered haltingly. Alexa was so neat. Everything looked strange. Expensive makeup, expensive clothes. I thought I was doing her a favor by taking them. But the excuses rang hollow. The fact remained, Romina had stolen. And now it was all out in the open, in plain sight, uncovered. I shrugged and said quietly, I think this is a good time to break off relations with everyone. I turned and got into the car next to the editor, and as the wheels of the car rolled across the familiar driveway, I noticed out of the corner of my eye how Aiden and Romina began to argue with our parents right at the porch. Their voices were getting louder, their gestures were getting sharper, and I could almost physically feel how the atmosphere of tension that I had tolerated for so long was starting to bubble and grow, ready to burst out in front of the neighbors watching from behind the curtains. I didn't want to be part of this drama anymore. I wasn't going to go back there even in my thoughts. To avoid another invasion, I blocked all their numbers in my phone, at once, without regret, with one click of my finger, breaking the invisible thread that held me in this circle. Several months passed. My life sparkled with new colors. I lived in my own apartment, silence and light filled the space, books stood in neat stacks on the table, and my favorite houseplants bloomed by the window. I worked, wrote, traveled in my imagination, and felt that for the first time in a long time I was living the way I really needed to. And then one day, during an autograph session at the local library, I saw a figure slowly approaching me, which seemed familiar even before I could make out the face. It was Romina, thin and haggard, wearing the same clothes she had once taken from me, and the same nail polish on her fingers. She approached, her voice shaking. I'm sorry. I need help. I looked at her calmly, without anger, without fury, just with clear determination, and said, I'm sorry too. But I don't know anyone like you anymore. I stood up, leaving her standing there, without taking her clothes, her makeup, or the words that could never erase what had been done. According to what I later heard from acquaintances, after the house was sold, my parents, Aiden and Romina, continued to live together, although together quickly lost its original meaning. My parents resumed their extravagant spending, travel, shopping, lotteries, and it soon became clear that Aiden's income alone was not enough to maintain the usual routine. Over time, the disappointment began to spill out. They began to snap at Romina, demanding reports, control, explanations, which she did not know how to avoid. She had to look for a job to cover expenses, monitor the budget, balance between old claims and a new reality. There was no longer talk of children. Now she was too busy, too exhausted, too worn out. I was no longer involved in their lives. From time to time, I heard rumors, echoes of their problems, but I did not react. I concentrated on my writing, on my home, on my stories, where everything happened according to my rules. I, Alexa, finally felt free.